Bruh. Hello, gamers. Oh man. Oh god. Oh. How is everyone today? Whoa. Oh, I went to bed far too late last night. I was watching some streamers, and after midnight, more around 1, I realized, oh, it's Friday. So the new episode, the last episode of The Expanse is out. Of course, I have to watch it. It's the last episode of The Expanse. And it was an hour and change. It was a great episode. I deeply enjoyed it. It's a lot bittersweet because the final book came out, and then now the TV series is over, even though fingers crossed. I do hope that they will do some other thing like movies or something like that, because the story now we are in the end game, and it's so interesting, it's so good. But yeah, it only makes sense if you read the book now. Well, the books, the last 3. And yeah, that finished around 2, and then I stayed up a little bit later again, and then I had to deal with Ray, my cat, who decided that she wanted attention because it was 3 in the morning. And I also realized I had to take out the trash because it's bin collection day. Long story short, I ended up going to bed at 4 in the morning. So I woke up a little bit groggy today. And then I remembered that I have a presentation at 5:40 tomorrow morning, and I'll have to be awake at 4 in order to do a last minute tech check and chat with the organizers of linuxconf.au, which means I will need to I needed to pad out some of the sleep time, which also meant I basically took a little bit of a nap around noon-ish, and I woke up after a while. But yeah, I had to delay the streaming today for that. Oh god. Oh well. Happens. It happens. Ooh. So today I wanted to, instead of writing documentation, I wanted to write some GTK code. Well, some GTK widget. Mostly to get acquainted with the style inside libadwaita and get a little bit more confident with making changes there and dealing with the feedback from maintainers and design team. It's something that I tend to do whenever I start working on working with a new project, instead of using the instead of committing GTK. I'm used to GTK by now, but I'm not entirely used to other libraries, especially new ones like libadwaita. So it's mostly for me, not for any specific reason, but it's mostly for my benefit, so I can get into the how would I call it? Into the flow of things. So let's see. Yeah, it's I'm sorry. It mostly has to do with getting comfortable. It's a little bit like lurking in a IRC channel, like back in the day, to understand how are the dynamics of the project and dynamics of the community around it. And yeah, I mean, I've dealt with the design team multiple times over the past 10 plus years, so it's not, I'm not completely unaware of how they work. And I've worked with the people that are currently working on libadwaita, so, but it's a good, it's good etiquette to ask and learn whenever you enter somebody else's project. It's like you don't go to your friend's house and start doing whatever the shit you do in your house. Aside from general etiquette, you also have situational etiquette. So it's better to ask and do things as people prefer to, instead of barging in and do whatever the hell you want. It's kind of annoying when people do that on issue trackers. I've had my fair share of people coming into issue trackers and like the first merge request they propose, or the first patch they propose, is let's change the coding style so that I'm comfortable with it. And I'm like, no, go away. What the hell do you want? It's such a, I mean, yeah, it's such a power move to establish your dominance, to assert your dominance on the project. Let's change the coding style to something that I am comfortable with. But it's a stupid merge request and usually gets insta closed because it's stupid. Honestly, don't ever do that. If a project doesn't have an established coding style, you can propose a bunch of modifications and you can propose a way to document the existing coding style and then do that. But do not ever jump into a project and like submit a merge request that changes the coding style. Well, because the maintainers will be entirely justified to tell you to just fuck off and die. But another thing is just stay there a little bit, get acquainted with the code, get acquainted with how things are done, and then propose what you're doing. Ask questions if at all possible, because it's good and people should answer your questions. But other than that, don't barge in and try to have your way with the project without learning how things work first. It's not even good, like, it's good etiquette, good behavior. Don't be an asshole, essentially. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to take a widget from GTK demo, which is the tagged entry demo. It's just a demo on how to use the GTK text widget, which is the core widget of text entries. And I know that there are a couple of users of tagged entries in the GNOME platform, and they use that particular widget for their own internal use. I don't expect this to land into libadwaita at all. I don't expect it to land as a HIG pattern, but it will give me some ideas on how to deal with adding new UI elements to libadwaita and adding new elements to the HIG and talk to the design team in regard to what other UI patterns we can add to the HIG and whether or not they belong to libadwaita or not. So let's go and switch to my desktop. There you go. So we are inside libadwaita now, which is good. But we mostly want to go inside GTK for a little bit so we can see the tagged entry demo. Yes. So the tagged entry demo inside GTK demo, it's very simple. You get widget, you can add a tag, which is a widget again, and you can insert a tag after that, so it's another widget, and remove a tag. And the tag widget is here. You can set if it has a label, if it's a close button. These are pretty trivial things. But for instance, this API is for a demo, of course, and it's so immediately I would not do it like this. For instance, adding a tag with a widget requires that you create a tagged entry widget. And also, yeah, you can only have labels. The label is basically you cannot access the widget except with widgets, and you cannot oh my god. You can only keep track of widgets. It's kind of useful if you're doing XML, but if you're using it by XML, which is not how you would use a tag demo, a tagged entry anyway. So for instance, you don't want to have a widget there, you want to have a name for the widget, like a GTK stack. And the tagged entry should not be a GTK widget, should be GObject. So like an ancillary object that holds the actual widget and holds the label that you get, whether or not it has a close button. And then you want a remove tag, which is, yeah, you want the remove tag to remove the label. Oh, thanks Code Therapy for the follow. And after that, you want to have to be able to insert the tags. One of the things that this does, that having a widget does, is that allows you to style things using the widget inside the CSS. But instead, you probably want to do something like the GTK level API. So the GTK level API, we saw it, where is it? Yeah. You saw it inside the last stream, last few streams for the tutorial, beginner's tutorial. So we want to go here and see the level bar. Here. The level bar has an identifier, is or average, good. It's a freeform string, right? And a threshold here. So you use this value, the name of the offset, as a way to style it. So you can go here and see basically the name of the offset, the name used for the offset is going to be part of a CSS selector. So you can style that. I can add a little bit of CSS snippet or CSS fragment to that. So you add the offset here. My offset becomes a class which is attached to the block. And then you can style it using background color, border style, border color, border. And nice this. Nice. Border style. And border style, solid and 1px. But yeah, you can style it using CSS. So the way I would implement tags for a tagged entry would be precisely like this. So you define a name for the tag, which lets you retrieve the object inside the tagged entry, but also becomes the name of the CSS class applied to it. So in the end, you would have like a tagged entry, tag dot, I don't know, name of the tag. And the name of the tag will have some restrictions on the actual name that you can use. So you can only use alphanumeric values. You have to start with whatever. It's basically what CSS expects. And then whenever you want to do things like change the color or change anything else, you can style it using CSS. And if you generate those colors like programmatically, you will have to generate a CSS fragment programmatically and do that. Which is typically how we do things these days in GTK anyway. So as we can see, the tagged entry API is not exactly what I would use. Yeah, but still, it's a good start. It's a good initial, like, it's a good rough prototype. And the implementation is also probably good enough. So this is the entry, you get the text, it implements editable. Yeah, it already has a tag style CSS fragment, but we don't need that. Yeah, for instance, this one would not be an entry, would be a tagged entry, for instance. And then we'd have to modify the CSS. And you can also see that it's a box layout. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you don't need to do this. Yeah, and it keeps track of the widgets using the GTK API, which it's fine. But then you can see here that the actual tag widget is different. So why has the build failed? The build pipeline requires a rebuild. See if you can build it. Oh my god, has the build boost? Yeah, well. I might have another. Let's see if I can get oh. I always have an outside, a build outside. So let's see. So yeah, the tagged entry works like this. Add tag here. It also appends the tags at the end, whereas we might want them to be at the beginning instead of having them at the end. Then the button here, you can remove them. There we go. Yeah, remember these. But basically, yeah, this is a simple like widget. But if we want to add more functionality to it, if we want to add it to a public API, we should add more functionality to it, or at the very least, like include it in slightly differently. By the way, if you have any questions, any at all, just feel free to ask them in chat. Don't worry about it. So, oh, let me also install. Yeah, of course. I want to get rid of this installation of Ubuntu. You have no idea. Tomorrow I'm going to install the new SSD on my machine and then install Silverblue. Yeah, so I get proper color, syntax highlighting. But yeah, so this is kind of an initial start for an entry demo, a tagged entry demo. But again, it should not be a widget there. Widgets are, I mean, yes, widgets should be like well defined and stuff, but whenever you expose a specific widget, it gets iffy soon. People will start thinking they can reuse some of it elsewhere. It's always yeah, ideally we really want to have an object that holds the state of the tag. So the label, which is used as CSS class, the name or the identifier, which is held as a CSS class, the label, which is then applied to a GTK label, and then whether or not it has a close button, for instance. You also don't want to have any additional child to that widget. But also, you might want to deal with things like, let's go to GitLab. So let's see, as an example, you want to implement the same kind of tag here. So you want to have a way to raise an action when clicking on the tag outside of the close button. You also want to style the close button differently, like this. So let's see, like if you click this, GitLab will generate a query that shows every single issue tagged with that tag, that label. So you want the tag widget to be reactive to events, not just the close the close button that removes the tag from the entry. And yeah, you want that Boolean value, the show close button, to be a Boolean that is tagged at the developer's discretion, because, for instance, in this case, you cannot remove the tag, right? Whereas here, since you're editing the issue, you may want to remove the tag. The other thing is you want to have a description for the tag for two reasons. One, like literally descriptive functionality when hovering, so you get a tooltip, but also for accessibility reason. So you want accessibility reason to have an accessible description. The accessible description in GTK is typically done using tooltips. So if you assign a tooltip to a GTK widget and you don't do anything else, the tooltip will be used as the accessible description. And the accessible description is different from the accessible label, which is instead a user-readable, likely localized text. And in the case of buttons, for instance, is the label of the button. You have two separate things there. But the yeah, you have two separate concepts. One is label and one is description. This is oldest time. ATK during GTK2 had it, GTK3 had it, the ARIA spec, which is kind of what we follow these days for accessibility, also has it. So it's different. There are two different attributes, and we need to have both. But that requires then to have the ability to set a description to a widget. What is building? Oh, the operation. What? What is it doing? Okay. So it's built in GTK. That's fine. Yeah, you probably cannot hear it, but because I have a noise gate, but my fan is spinning up pretty drastically. Okay. But yeah, we can, if we start from this, we have a rough idea of how to make a tagged entry for libadwaita. And starting from that, we can modify it to get a proper tagged entry that is not a demo. So no, I don't care. Oh god, the updating, the software updater in Ubuntu is so annoying. You don't need to pester me all the time. Jesus, what the hell is wrong with you? So in libadwaita, let's switch. Let's switch branches so we don't accidentally mess up main. So we can start from you can see every single widget in libadwaita has its own SCSS fragment. Like for instance, the switch. These are the assets for symbolic icons. And these are the various bits and pieces. This is the resource. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, for the time being, we don't really need to add a style sheet. Well, we will have to add a style sheet, otherwise it will look bad. But we can start right now with nothing there. So let's create this. So one thing that I didn't check is, yes. So finally a library that does this. Even though they're using the freeform copyright, which is not great. So the typical thing to do is, let's add a comment with the copyright, the file name, and then the license stuff. These days, it's a lot easier. I mean, if you have Builder, you can do LGPL, and it will do all of this for you, which is nice. And this is me, and this is me. But you don't want to do this. You want to do this. I never remember if libadwaita is 2.1 or later. Yeah, 2.1 or later. Oh, if you want to piss me off, use GNU Library General Public License version 2.0, the 2.1 or later, which does not exist, or GNU Lesser General Public License version 2.0 or later, which does not exist either. It was called Library GPL version 2.0 and then got renamed Lesser GPL and in version 2.1. So make sure to use that. But instead of doing that at all, use this. And even in this case, you can do PDX, file, copyright, text. And there you go. These two are machine readable. And people will thank you because it's so annoying to understand what license a bit of code has. Since we are taking in inspiration, at the very least, the code in GTK, we should also do something like this. That's 2019 Matthias. Since that is the author of the original tagged entry. This is always important. Always make sure to credit people. The other thing is, don't ever put email addresses in source code. Because people will send you email about random pieces of code you wrote 20 years ago that you completely forgot about, instead of opening bugs, for instance. So, yeah, it's also a reason why I don't put my email address in the about page for applications I maintain. I'm still getting email notifications, or in general, like emails about GNOME Dictionary, which I wrote 15 years ago, and I don't maintain anymore. People should be filing bugs, not sending private emails at random people just because they saw their email address somewhere. Another thing, let's see. Yeah, pragma ones. Oh yeah, and this. In theory, so pragma ones. In theory, libadwaita should probably have a generic include file like adv dash types or something like that. That would include GTK and adv version and probably the enumeration types as well, because that is a lot. No. That is usually easier to deal with, especially if you start adding like project-wide definitions, or if you want to add a new header. Inclusion rules are recursive anyway, so they get included. Which also means that we have to go inside adwaita.h if I find it. Yep. And add a tagged entry here. And then we'll have to go inside the meson build file, looking on headers. Okay, source headers. And here. And that should do the trick. Ouch. So one thing you probably shouldn't be doing, this is the Objective-C style of arguments. You should probably do this, because if you start adding a new argument to the function here, you will get to rearrange every single argument if it's too long, and the diff will be a lot more noisy than it should be. I mean, it looks nice. It looks a lot nicer than everything aligned on the left-hand side. But yeah, if we wanted to add an argument that is longer than install dir typelib, then you have to rearrange every single argument that is inside this function, and it's not really worth it. Let's see. This one should not be necessary because the installation directory is libdir package config by default. And neither the version is necessary because the project version is the default value for the version. Even the requires should be necessary because the libraries, you should pass libadwaita as the first argument to package config generate. This is the reason why I never go into the build files. I started looking at things and this should not be needed, this should not be needed. Then I start like figuring out how to fix all these issues and I get sidetracked. It's a great way to nerd snipe me. just ask me, can you go over the build system for this project? And the end result is, yeah, I'm screwed. But yeah, for the time being, we'll leave it at that. I'm not going to go into a lot of details. Let's see how libadwaita deals with leaf widgets. What kind of style they use. Like status page is a final type, and they use the gdeclare final type macro. That's fine. The coding style is a little bit all over the place for the other files. So it's not aligned. But it's grouped. So the accessor pair for properties get aligned to the same edge, but in this case gets aligned to the next tab. Yeah, the coding style is a little bit all over the place. If we... Okay. It's an interesting choice. But it's fine. Okay, so we can copy that. Okay, and then we can do we're gonna use it, the available in all symbol visibility macro, because adwaita hasn't been branched yet for the 1.2 release. Or 1.1. I honestly don't know if adwaita is gonna go with 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, or if it's gonna go for 1.0, 1.2, 1.4, a la GTK. It entirely depends on the maintainers. But since it hasn't been branched yet, it doesn't have versioning macros, which means we get to use the in all backstop, even though technically speaking it's not inside 1.0. For those that have not been keeping up with GTK, this is how we annotate public symbols these days in GNOME libraries. We use compiler attributes to say this symbol is visible. Otherwise, if it's not annotated, then the symbol is private to the library. This is kind of the default on Windows, for instance. So it actually simplifies a lot our portability between platforms. But additionally, you can see it there, but for GTK, for instance, we have different versions. Let me see if I can find the header file. The version macro. Probably not. But yeah, basically we are able to annotate every single symbol with the version of GTK that introduces it. so that you can tell at build time, please warn me if I start using symbols that have been introduced in the next stable version of GTK. For instance, you depend on GTK 4.4 and you specify that every time you use a symbol that has been introduced in later version of GTK, you will get a compiler warning. And the same thing for deprecations as well. So if you depend on GTK 4.4 again, and something was deprecated in GTK 4.2, then you get a warning. You say, okay, you should be porting to the new symbol or whatever else. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think I have it here. Where is it? No, I don't remember where it, because here the, oh, it's in GTK. I always forget that we put that in GTK, not in GTK. Yeah. For instance, yeah. Like this. If you say that you only want to have like your minimal, the version you require for GTK, the minimal version you require for GTK is 4.4. Everything that is deprecating 4.4 gets a warning, but everything that gets deprecated in 4.2 doesn't get a warning, for instance. And yeah, and the max allowed is the same, but on the other end of the spectrum. So if you say the version of GTK that I want to allow is 4.4, you can still use it against 4.6 because GTK is ABI compatible. But if you get if you start using symbols that are annotated with available in 4.6, when you say I want to only want to allow only 4.4, then you get a compiler warning saying you should not be using this. Okay. So G declare final type. Entry, and this is a GTK widget. The GDeclare final type is the code generation macro for G-object declarations inside other files. It will do a lot of the heavy lifting, well, not the heavy lifting, but the boring boilerplate stuff for you, like declare the various macros to do type checking and typecasting. But also it lets you say that this is a final type, so it will not, you cannot subclass it. You can only use it as is. You cannot create a derived type, which is useful for widgets because then you can avoid people subclassing it and having to deal with eventual changes inside the internals with newer versions of the library, or they derive it and they make a mess and then start complaining about the fact that stuff breaks if you derive it, which, yeah, no shit. So this is the first one, and we declared the type. Before adding new functionality, new like API, well, apart from a constructor, we can do this So a constructor is very like the minimal API surface that we can deal with. But before we do that, we also probably want to start defining the tag object that will go inside the tagged entry. And we get to the hard part of one of the hard parts of software design, which is naming things. The two most complicated things in software development, naming things, cache invalidation, and one by one, offset by one. So we can start with the trivial and use ADV, widget tag. But it's very generic. The other option is tagged entry tag. But it's so long and so... Let's see if we can get some inspiration from other. Like, yeah, this view switcher has a bunch of other things there. And the tab bar has there. The status page, no. The squeezer. Yeah, the squeezer page. So a squeezer page and would imply that, yeah, we need a, let's see. Yeah, it's a private. But also you have a tab. So it's entirely possible to use widget tag. And it has some existing like prior art for this, like show close. So technically speaking, it's possible to call it tab, but the problem is it's a private widget. It's a private widget, not a public one. So yeah, naming is always hard. Even without going into like the esoteric bits of, or like the philosophical questions, like how do people search for things? There's plenty of discussion about how do we name things so that people can search for them and find what they are looking for. And that kind of discussion makes you sound so fucking smart. But if you don't get an answer out of it, the question is useless. So maybe we should do this. But we don't want to have a widget there. We want to have a GObject, as we said. And also, we don't want a constructor there. Do we want a constructor there? Let's see. Like GTK stack page, which is another kind of prior art that I'm considering when writing widget. Like GTK stack. Yeah, GTK stack page is there, but there is no constructor. The stack page is created when you construct it, when you add a child. So yeah, we don't need a constructor there. The tag object will be created for you whenever you add a new tag to the entry. Yeah, it makes sense. But we still want to have the options there. So oh, what the hell? Yes, okay. So you cannot change the tag at runtime, the tags identifier at runtime, because that would be bad. But you still want to have this. And then you want to have getter and setter first. Okay, getter. There's a separate, and then we get the available. No. Yeah, why did I do this? I mixed the two. I'm so used to adding the setter first. I'm so used to setting using the setter first and the getter second, and I completely messed up that. Also, how is the alignment there? They are aligned. Okay. So this one gets aligned here. Then we have another one, which is available in all. And it's going to be Boolean, really high, that loads. And this one gets aligned as well. So this is the base tag API that we want to commit to for the time being. We don't need anything else right now. And then, yeah, we can start with that. Okay. So we need to create a new file. Yeah, the snippet code could use a little bit of tweaking there. This one, Linux, no copyright text. And then we remove this. And we use 2.1. So we need to include config.page, and we include this one should be enough at the very least. Oh, hi Georges. Yeah, we can start from this. Since this is a final type, it means that the instance structure is left for us to implement. Again, coding style. In this case, let's go with the avatar. Do we want to use a gizmo? Yeah, we're probably gonna use a gizmo as well. Okay, coding style is this one. Okay. Yeah, we should have a script that deals with coding style. It's complicated, but usually in libgweather I added well, I decided to take a hit and on the history of the project and run a CLang format on it with a coding style that coding style definition file that kind of approximated the coding style of the project as it was, and then just run it. Screw it, I don't care about git blame anymore. And after that, I run a style checker using CLang format diff as part of my CI pipeline. And every time you open a merge request, it will run the style check. And if there are issues with the coding style of your contribution, it will open a comment. It will add a comment to the merge request with a diff with your code and the expected coding style, which saves me so much time in going through contributions, because it will fix the coding style for you, and then you just need to basically just fix your code without having to go through the coding style and say, oh, this should probably have 2 spaces. No, you get to fix your contribution. I should also add a script that does this locally in using a git hook, so that you can deal with this without having to push to GitLab and then get the style checker to scream at you. But still, so this one we have a GTK widget. So since we are not going to store, so we're gonna store the text widget, which is part of our widget, base widget, which will deal with the actual text input and output using delegation. But unlike the GTK demo, the tagged entry in the GTK demo, we are going to use objects for storing our tags. So we need to keep track of those objects. And we are going to use a ghash table. because all our tags will have an identifier, and that identifier has to be unique. I'm gonna also leave a comment here saying table string maybe tag. I find it a lot more useful to give a little bit of comments annotating the types of complex containers like hash table, glist. Well, they're not complex, but like container types, because it makes it immediately clear what the container type actually contains. And then we do g define type. Yeah, I can use g define final type, which was added to glib 270, because adwaita still depends on glib 266. But once people start depending on glib 270, they can use g define final type, and g define final type is the source code macro, boilerplate macro, that is the dual of the gdeclare final type. As soon as you start trying to derive a final type, the type system will scream at you. It will literally error out, so that's it. Game over. You have to go and fix your code. And GTK. Right. In this case, we have to use the width code because we have g implement interface. Never remember. G implement interface. It's GTK type editable, and we call it editable interface. Yeah. And we close it there. So we have to declare the function first. Otherwise, it won't work. Yeah. Oh, interface. Yeah. So we don't have to deal with that. Yeah. Now we can go static void. For the time being, we leave it empty. And we'll leave it empty as well here. So we probably want to define the tag inside the same source file. So we go back and we do, oh, come on. In this case, it's going to be an object. And it's going to contain the name, even though the name is going to be inside the hash table as a key. We want the key to be tied to the lifetime of the object it contains. And then we want to store here And then we are gonna keep the actual tag widget. The tag widget is gonna be something that is constructed like manually, so we don't have to deal with that. But we want to have the label here and GTK widget tag load. So this one is the widget that will be added to the tagged entry. And these two are the widgets that are inside the tag. So we can set the label and decide whether to hide or show the close button. What is it? No. Yeah, a little bit back. Whoa. Haha. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Firefox, for crashing on me. Wow. Oh, yeah, thank you very much, Firefox. Jesus. Wow. That one I did not expect. Oh, I have a ton of virtual desktops, Georges. I really have a ton of them. Oh no, it was put in Blado. Sorry about that. Yeah, Georges, it's X11. Yeah, that was our friendly windowing system, X11. Yeah, I think, I don't know what happened. It's Ubuntu. I honestly don't know. So weird. Usually doesn't happen. Though, to be fair, this is not the first time that Firefox crashed on me recently. Oh, I know I'm not. I'm using the default installation from Ubuntu. I don't even know if it's a snap, to be quite honest. Yeah, I have no idea. Yeah, it's a Firefox snap for Ubuntu. Yeah, honestly, I have no idea. Ah. Where is it? Yeah. Yeah, I think it was the Spotify or whatever started doing weird shit. Anyway, we don't need music. So instead of running through, why did it fail? Yeah, of course. libsas, of course it's failing. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of messy. This installation was literally upgraded from 1804 to now. So it's bound to be completely messed up. Again, tomorrow it will be fixed by switching to Fedora Silverblue. But I'm not going to do that before giving my presentation. Okay. Public types, undefined reference to ADV. Yeah, of course, I didn't use the. Okay, so we are going to go with define type. Okay, type object. And we are going to go here, then sadly this is still needed. Let's see what happens now. Yeah, I know that doesn't implement properties. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, the build is continuing, but it's fine. So yeah, we are. Yeah, the build succeeded. It's fine. Which means we added most of the required things. Yeah, as I was saying, Silverblue is what I normally use on my laptop. I've been using it for a couple of years now. But the yeah, this machine is my former desktop, so it came with the same with Ubuntu installed because of NVIDIA. I was also using it for like playing games, which at the time required Ubuntu because Steam is only ever tested on Ubuntu, and there was no Steam on FlatHub at the time. Okay, so now we want now we want to define the minimal amount of things necessary to make this tagged entry work. So we need class set property, and object class. Yeah. Then we also want dispose for disposing of the memory allocated by the widget. Again, what? Oh, it's because I have the mouse pointer here. I don't know. and a the auto alignment is nice. I like it in Builder. To be fair, I stopped trying to auto align stuff in my personal projects because it's a pain in the ass. And the other thing is auto alignment prevents me from doing like some sort of Russian roulette where I start adding space after the first argument and then see if I can get to the exact spacing requirements for the alignment of everything else. It's boilerplate. You have to make it fun in any way possible. Otherwise, you would just stop writing C code. Okay, since this is a GTK editable, we have to use the GTK editable API. So if you notice here, in order to implement an editable widget, you implement the GTK editable interface. And then to avoid doing all the boring bits of installing properties, GTK provides you with a function that you have to call yourself inside your class in it. And since we don't have any properties inside this class, the tagged entry, we start at 1. So we basically say, so the function works this way. You pass your class here and the class structure so that GTK editable will be able to install all the properties. And then you have to pass the offset from your own property. So if you define a bunch of properties before for your class, you pass the index, the first free index after your last property. This way, GTK editable will be able to append the properties inside your class without making a mess. So set property, all it does is this. So you basically pass your own GObject instance, the property ID that was registered, the value, and the property definition. And since we don't have any additional properties there, we just bail out at the end. If you get a weird property identifier, so if it's not one of the GTK editable properties, then you just bail out there and you leave a warning. And then you get the property implication, property implementation. Which does precisely the same thing. So the overall idea is that inside your instance init, instead, you set the delegate widget. So you create the text widget that you want, and you set the parent, and you tell the interface that this is the delegate. And the overall idea is that the editable interface will do all the heavy lifting behind the scenes to essentially say capture the text input and other details. So you get all the functionality of a text entry widget, but without having to implement it yourself. So yeah, we do basically exactly the same thing, except the CSS class. Yeah. And then we actually add a little bit of, yeah, it's too small otherwise. And that's it. And then we do self next to table full. Oh, come on. And then null here and g object unref. So why do we use null for the key destruction function? Because we keep the key inside the tag object and we pass a pointer there. This way, whenever we remove the tag object from the hash table, it also takes care of freeing the identifier here. And we can use simple pointer comparison there, because we don't we know where it is, so we can check using simple pointer comparison when iterating, for instance. One thing that I wanted to add, one thing that I wanted to add in the API for the tagged entry was a list model. Basically, if you want to know all the tags that are inside the tagged entry, you ask for a list model of the tags. And that also gives you the ability to monitor things like tags that get added and removed or updated, which is kind of useful. And we use that pattern all over GTK4 now. And libadwaita also does that for a bunch of other things. So I think it's a good pattern to have, well, to follow. Yeah. We need to set the delegate. So set delegate. So it's not set delegate, it's get delegate. It's gonna be get delegate. We define it here, so you can see it. Where is it? Yep. So the entire magic happens because the interface is able to get the widget, the internal widget that deals with all the text entry, that the text handling from the outer widget that contains it, using this simple function here. That all it does is return this. So it's ADB and entry get delegate. And we do ADB itself. And then we return self a no, returns an editable widget, editable widget. Yeah. And that's it. That's all there. That's all there is, really. Once you start setting up the delegates and things like that, you can create your own custom text entry and then style it the way you want it, then do whatever you want with it. For instance, yeah, you don't need to do anything more than that to create your own custom text entry widget. You create your outer widget, create the inner text, and then set the delegation so that the GTK editable API goes straight from your widget to the internal one and back. It's basically a pass-through. It's very convenient and avoids the necessity of subclassing GTK entry, for instance, especially if you want to style it differently, and then avoids the complexities of having to deal with GTK entry being a complex widget with its own API to deal with things like password mode or whatever else. It's like a tagged entry should not, for instance, have the ability to set to be in password mode, because it doesn't make any sense. Why would you tag a password? It's bonkers. But if you subclass GTK entry, you cannot deal with that. And also, once you subclass GTK entry, you cannot add widgets to it, because GTK entry doesn't expect that. So if you want to add widgets, you have to start from the lower levels and get GTK text and then add widgets to it. Well, create your own subclass of GTK widget and add widgets to it. One of them is going to be GTK text. Yeah, we have to implement dispose as well here. Dispose. And then we have to chain up. Okay. One of the things I want to add to GObject is actually a small macro. I added it to GTK internal for the non-GObject types. It's a little bit slower. It's something like this. Okay. It works like this. It's going to be GTK week and type type how's it called? Yeah, 1 second. Yeah. Yeah, this is just G-type plus week parent. And then something like this. And then you use it like this. For instance, in this case, is G-type. It's really type entry. And it's going to be disposed. And then use it like this. It's a little bit of Python-ish kind of thing. But in theory, you can have G define type, define this instead of being a macro, it would define a static inline function. It would be slower than the parent class pointer that we define. But in theory, you can tweak it so that you can literally chain up to whatever parent you have instead of doing GObject class cast. It's a little bit of syntactic sugar. It defines that so that you automatically do that. You automatically can chain up wherever. You can essentially use the same macro every time. You just change the final type that you want to cast to. The final parent you want to, but yeah. Again, it's slightly less efficient, but it's a little bit more readable. Mostly because parent class, you have to know it's defined that way. But yeah. Anyway, we were saying we have to dispose, and in order to dispose, we have to do something like this. No. Basically, we are telling the editable interface implementation that we finished the delegation process. The GTK editable will disable a bunch of stuff, disconnect a bunch of signals and things like that. And then we do the clear pointer text GTK widget unparent. This one will unparent the text object from the tagged entry, and will set the pointer to null. This way, since you can re-enter dispose multiple times, you have to nullify everything. So don't like this, so I need to do this. And then we have to do clear pointer of tags to hash table unref. And parenting will also drop the reference from the text widget, which means it will be collected at the end. And we unref the hash table we created inside our instance init, which will get rid of all the tags, which also means it will get rid of all the widgets that are still parented to the tagged entry. Because we're going to code the tag object to unparent the widget automatically from the tagged entry. We also probably want to have a back pointer here. Might be useful. Might not be, but you never know. So this is the thing. So we want to do something like colors. Oh, what the hell? And then since we create a bunch of stuff there, we have to unparent the tag and free the name. So we actually want to call, we add entry remove tag by doing self entry. But in this case, if we do this, so this is going to be a bug. If we do this exactly as it is, it's going to be a bug. Why? Because we are going to remove the tag, and the tag will run gobject unref on the tag itself. And by doing that, we are going to end up again inside dispose and so on and so forth. We also end up doing some weird reference counting fucky-wucky, which is not good. So for the time being, we do this. We'll probably have to add some internal API that will remove the tag without changing the reference count, and like steal tag or something like that. But yeah, you always have to think about this stuff in advance, because if you don't, you will start getting weird bugs, and then you lose your mind trying to track them down. And let's see. We also want properties. And we, of course, have to define a bunch of properties there. So we have to... Jesus Christ. Okay. So, prop name, prop label, show rows. And this is the last one. You will, if you look inside the GTK and other libraries code, you will probably find something like this, prop 0. This is needed because all the property offset have to start at 1. 0 is used as no property or invalid property. But if you want to do that, you can also do this. You can tell the enumeration to start at 1. Hello, Yelter. So if you start from that, you get a little bit different. And also you want to do like G props and props. Another thing that you will see in some of the code is this. In older code, this is not necessary because all variables declared inside static storage will be initialized. Is the only place, if I remember correctly, it's the only place where C will, by spec, initialize variables. So if you do something like static in foo if foo equals 0, this will always be valid, even if you don't specifically initialize it, because the variables will be in static storage will be initialized to their neutral value. So they will be all the integers will be initialized to 0, all the scalar values will be initialized to 0 or null. In this case, is a array of pointers. An array is just a pointer to a pointer, which means it's a pointer, which means it gets initialized to null. That's it. C lessons with Emanuele Bassi. Yeah, I see a lot of times people just initializing stuff. You don't need to do that. Of course, you cannot do this without actually testing it, without actually initializing it. Otherwise, it will fail because C is nothing, is not, if not inconsistent. So we initialize this, and then inside our tag, yeah, tag is gonna be a GTK box. With a spacing of very little, like 2 pixels probably. Then we'll have label. And then we'll have a close. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Initializing stuff even when the spec is tells you that it will be initialized. The side effect is that the side effect is a lot more verbosity and possibly some some weird stuff there. If you want to initialize to anything else, yes, you have to initialize it. Initializing to null usually is not entirely useful. But yeah, no, it's a good point. If you want to do it because it's consistent with the fact that C is inconsistent, then absolutely, it's fine. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, where am I? Here. No. Here. Yeah. God, but what the hell happened here? Honestly. Okay. So okay, GTK button. Right, one constructor. Okay, new form icon name. So we are going to use but what icon are we going to use? We should probably use the same icon that the tab uses. Tab is really complicated. Yeah, close button. It's going to use window close symbolic. So we are going to use the same thing. Okay. So we're going to create everything ourselves here. In theory, like for another pass, I would probably make the tag a UI file, especially if we want to do more complicated things. Also, we do we show the close button by default. Hi, Gunibert. Yeah, we show it by default. I mean, for the time being. Then we can decide whether or not to. So we do name, and we have to use what the heck, and we not for the time being. Let's not jump ahead. The name is for accessing and for styling purposes. Close it, and we do tab props name. No. I never remember if. Oh god, why can't I ever remember? Come on. Alright. Yeah, default value is empty. Even though technically it cannot be empty. Right. Construct only. And there is no explicit notification anyway. Let's. I didn't add a nick and a blurb here. I'm trying to convince people to stop doing that. For two reasons. Yeah, I know there's a snippet for that. It's finger memory, and I'm sorry. There is a snippet for that in GNOME Builder. GNOME Builder is full of snippets for simplifying stuff, but for a person that uses Vim and has been writing this code for the past 15 plus years, finger memory takes precedence. But yeah, I'm trying to convince people to stop using nick and blurb, the second and third argument of gparam spec, whatever, because they're pointless. You should document the property. You should document the property with a property documentation stanza here. And because it will be the thing that gets taken into the introspection data. And the introspection data will be used for documentation. The only thing that uses the nick and a blurb and the blurb inside gparam spec is essentially Glade. And Glade doesn't work without libadwaita anyway in GTK4. But in general, Glade is not a good reason to do anything. You want to use the introspection data anyway. So I'm probably gonna write something on my blog and or the development blog for newer versions of GObject. But the best practice for writing properties in GObject based libraries is to document them and ignore the nick and blurb strings of gparam spec, whatever. Unless you're writing probably GStreamer code. Since GStreamer doesn't use introspection and uses property definitions for generating their everything, you probably want to still use those. But it's literally only for writing GStreamer elements. If you're writing anything else, don't bother. It's pointless. And yeah, it's just repetition. And it will force you to document your properties. not construct only. Static strings and G explicit notify. We need an explicit notify so that we have to the set and get properties will the set property will call into the C API and will emit the property notification only if the C API does. What is static string? Static string tells gparm spec string that the strings you pass for the name, the nick, and the blurb are in static storage, so they don't need to be copied. They will always be accessible because they are part of a program. They are inside the binary or the shared library. They are guaranteed to exist by the compiler, so there is no need to copy them. If you don't put gparm static strings, the gparm spec will copy the label inside the gparm spec. It would be a good default. The problem is now you have to go back in time with your DeLorean and fix it in 1997. So we cannot do anything about it. When gparm spec was written in, again, 1997, the default was copy everything. gparm 2 spec string. No, honestly, the entire gparm spec stuff is bonkers and should be nuked from orbit. I would rather replace it with a proper property API that didn't do all of this shit at all. And instead of dealing with default values and G value and bullshit like that, it would call into specific virtual function or specific functions that you pass. Or if you don't want a function, then it will manipulate the field of the instance structure or the private data structure by itself. Which I did. I wrote that code. It already exists. The main problem is that it requires every single public API to go through the same code paths, which are slower than pure C code. Because we have to find the property inside the class structure. And properties right now in GObject are terrible because they are stored inside a separate storage that is global for all types. So every time you look up a property, it will go inside this massive hash table and will look up all the properties registered for a type, take a bunch of logs for multi-threading, for thread safety, and then do a bunch of other bullshit. And it's terrible. So one of the ideas we had was, okay, we are redoing the properties anyway, so we are going to take, instead of storing everything inside the G property, we'll store them inside an offset inside the class structure. Which would be good, except this is where things get complicated, kids. What happens if you have a library that uses the old API for properties, and then you have a library in between your library, the other library, and the application code that uses the new style properties? It's kind of weird thing that happened when we changed the way we register the instance private data. Yeah, it's harmful if you have a ton of properties inside a GObject class, and like, for instance, GTK widget has a ton of properties. The hash table never becomes way too big. Like, I think GTK in total registers a few hundred properties, probably 1,000 properties. All the properties are shared per type, so it's not a big deal. It's never a huge deal. The problem is there are multiple problems with the properties in GObject. The easiest one is that it boxes everything inside gvalue, which is unnecessary most of the time. Especially if you're using the C API. If you're not using a C API, don't care. But if you're using a C API, then you don't need to box stuff. It does notification on a whim. It doesn't do comparisons unless you code them. And you have the internal API that calls the C API, usually. So if you do GObject set property, it will box the value, we'll have to box the value, which is expensive. Then it will find the property, get into your class, get into the set property, which is a massive switch function. And after that, it will take that and it will call the C API. And then the C API will do all the logic, which is entirely unnecessary. And then, unless you use the explicit notify flag, the end result is that GObject set will always notify, even if the C API compared the two properties, that the new value and the old value, and decided no, it didn't change. It will still notify. That's why explicit notify exists. But yeah, it's a mess. Yeah, nobody does that in C because you have the C API that you can call. And to be fair, even language bindings can avoid doing that when calling into a C API. I added the C accessors to the introspection data in GObject introspection to 170, which was the last cycle. So in theory, language bindings can literally, if you try to set a property, can literally know, oh, this property has a C accessor. I don't need to call GObject set property and box the value. I can just I can call the C API straight. So you don't have to box twice and do weird shit. So the end result is that you end up calling a C API instead of calling the C wrapper around the C API. That, yeah. Yeah, again, I would honestly recommend everyone that does introspection to use the introspection data and not do introspection on the fly using GObject class find property and list properties. Those are painful. And again, they take locks all the time because they have to be thread safe. Okay, and this is the last property for the tag. Whether the tag should show the close to move the tag down, move itself from the entry. It's true. We show it by default. And explicit notify. And then we install the properties. And that's it. So this one will need a bunch of other things there. Okay. And then we'll need to figure out the API. Let's see if we can build it, or if anything broke. Okay, yeah, no, we didn't add enough. Why is that? Tagged entry. Yeah. I probably didn't save anything. Anyway. Yeah. How are we doing for time? It's 2 hours and nearly 20 minutes. Yeah, we're not gonna finish this today, but we can probably figure out a bit of the public API. So for instance, we want to do something like we'll have to move this up. Otherwise, we're gonna mess up the declarations. So doing something like that, entry, one tag, name. Then we can do available in all. Remove time. We have to, no, we cannot return. We have to something like this. Then we probably want to do something like this. G is model. Yeah, instead of returning a list of tags, we do list tags or get tags, and we return a glist model. So you can okay. Yeah, basically do not deal with widgets there. You add a tag and then you set the label and whether or not it should show the close button. Then you can also have yeah, since they're all stored by name, we cannot really, and we have to add a tag. Really, it's not a list. It's I mean, we could also use a list, so we determine the ordering ourselves. But I don't know if we should. Do people add tags in a specific order, or they add tags? So do you append a bunch of tags and then prepend and then insert tags? Or you just add tags at the end or at the beginning? It's a good question. It's a good question. It's a good design question that will influence the API exposed by the widget. Yeah, add tags to the end. I kind of agree. Tags are not. There is no expectation of ordering there. At least I don't think so. I mean, at the end of the day, we'll probably append them when building the widget, but I don't think there is any expectation of being able to reorder a tag once it's been added. Yeah, this is kind of the minimum. I think this is kind of the minimal API that can be guaranteed. A way to add a tag, a way to remove the tag for tags that do not have a close button. So programmatic removal of tags. A way to get the list of tags as a list model that you can observe. And then for each tag, you get the name, which is used for addressing the tag and styling it. You get a label, a user-readable label, and whether or not it should show a close button or not. I think that's pretty much a good starting point. Oh, what is a tagged entry? Yeah, that's a good question. I showed it at the beginning of the stream. Let's see if yeah, it's part of a GTK demo. Yeah, here. So it's essentially an entry that allows you to add tags and then style them and then whatever. But for instance, right now we showed it like this, and then they eat into the entry. And maybe we want, instead of doing like this, we wanted to have a free-flowing kind of thing. So this will reflow down if the size isn't available, if there isn't enough size. But yeah, this is the basic version, which is part of a GTK demo that shows how to use GTK text and other widgets. But ideally, this is my attempt at getting more familiar with libadwaita and having a better, let's just say, a better version of this for libadwaita. And if it's not accepted, it's fine, because again, it's mostly for my benefit to learn how Adwaita is put together, how the design and code is dealt with, and also I want to talk to the design team as well, in case we want to add new functionality to libadwaita that is compatible with this. There are many applications that use it. I think Nautilus uses it. Let me check. So if we go into GNOME source and we do because it was in libgd. There was a widget that was precisely this in the GNOME documents library that everyone cut and paste. Yeah, Totem has it. Totem uses it for, I have no idea why, in the search area, probably. Yeah, search entry. I don't know. I think Nautilus uses it. Gedit uses it, I think. Yeah. There are a few applications that use it. We don't care really about Gedit, but yeah, there are many implementations, and it's one of the reasons why I'd like to have it inside libadwaita. First, because it's again GTK 3 only. Second, because we modified GTK to make it possible to write this kind of widget much more easily. Yeah, Nautilus has one. Yeah. So adding it would, it's probably a little bit late for a couple of applications that want to port to GNOME 42, want to port to GTK 4 in GNOME 42. But if we add it to libadwaita for the next cycle, then probably more applications will be able to use it. Epiphany has it. A ritual for trying GNOME photos, I think, as well. Yeah, everyone copies it. Yeah. For instance, Nautilus and Epiphany have it in tree, their own version. So they will port it to, I think, GTK4. But GNOME Photos won't be ported to GTK4 in GNOME 42. And Totem won't be ported to GTK4 in GNOME 42, likely. So if by GNOME 43 we have that kind of API, then we can tell Epiphany, Nautilus, Totem, GNOME Photo, and everyone else to use the one in libadwaita. Less code, copy and paste it, and a single styling entry point. And as I said, this is mostly for my benefit. I'm learning how libadwaita works, so I started off with this particular simpler widget. Yeah, it's 2.5 hours. I think we can probably stop here. I mean, I'll probably just do a build to ensure that I didn't do something stupid. Like, tagged entry. The object here. This one we can comment it out. Set property and get property. I still don't understand why this happens. Okay. Set property, get property. Okay. Yeah, the build should be fine. It's missing, yeah. So we go to the header file and we copy the API for the entry. Oh, sorry for the type. Let's do something like this. This is the Vim user in me that uses code folding. Even when I'm not using Vim. It's terrible what nearly 20 years of finger memory and habit will do to you. So, name is return. No, I remember the snippet. Okay. Okay. So one of the things that we used to do with GTK doc was something like this. And because GTK doc did not list the type of the argument inside the documentation. It showed the prototype of the function and then the description and then the arguments, and the arguments were completely separate from the declaration. GI docgen doesn't do that. GI docgen will list the type of the argument and the description of the argument along with other stuff like the direction, or if it's a string, whether or not it's a OS string or it's a UTF-8, it's a Unicode string or whatever. So there is no need to specify that the type, which means that you have to come up with a description of the argument, of every argument. In theory, it's not really necessary for methods, because methods have the first argument is always the instance argument, and the instance argument is assumed to be the type that you're using anyway. So there is no real documentation for that. Like, for instance, let's see. Yeah. Level bar, a method like get inverted. Yeah. If you notice, there is no argument here. There are no arguments because the only argument is GTK level bar, which is the instance argument of the method. So there's no point in documenting this. It's one of the things that always bother me inside GTK doc. And when I wrote gi.gen, I decided, no, let's stop doing this stupid stuff. Yeah. Like add offset values, it will document only the name and the value because those are the important parts. It's a method. It's a method that takes a GTK level bar. There is no point in getting a GTK level bar. Oh, there's a typo here. Oh, yeah. Level here, the name will be this, and it will do some weird shit there. So this one should be removed and put here. Anyway, yeah, I'll fix that. Yeah, let's finish adding the public API, the stubs for the public API. And returns null. GTK label. Okay, next. Okay, label. Oh, it's a GTK label. And yeah, then the setter. Now we want to update the label of the sets the user readable label of the leg. And the label must not be null, so we add a not nullable here. Technically speaking, everything is not nullable unless it's explicitly set as nullable. But the not nullable allows us to ensure that the documentation will never contain the nullable argument. So if it's not nullable, it's mostly a documentation hint. And then we do the label set text. And then you get notified by respec. What are we doing? And this one is going to be like oops. And that's it. In theory, if we wanted to, we could get the text from the label, compare it to the label, and then not do anything. Well, if it's going to be and this one is going to be returned. And then we do close equals not close. This way, if people pass an integer instead of a boolean, we take the truthy value and we collapse the value space to 0 or 1. It's a thing that you should always do with gboolean because it's not a bool value. It's not a C99 bool value. The C99 bool value is enforced by the compiler to only contain 0 or 1. So if you pass 42, for instance, it gets compressed to 1, 1 bit. gboolean is a type alias to unsigned int, which means, or int, I remember, but which means that it can contain anything that is an integer sized, which means that sometimes you will pass, what the hell? What are you doing? Builder, what are you doing? But yeah, if you pass like 42 here, and then you start looking at its contents, then it will fuck up and die. So you want to collapse the value space. Especially if you do something like this. Yeah, if somebody passed set show close from anything and it contains like 42, this will never match. Whereas you want to collapse everything there. Here, and then you do GTK with it, set visible, so close, and then G object notified by spec. And then, oops, no, and this is the easy bit. We document this as well. And true if visible button. Update. What we use for set label, the tag we want to update. That's whether the tag get show close button. And it's it. Let's build. Oh, interesting. What is it doing? Oh yeah, idiot. Get label, and then we have to go back up. Yes, that show close. Yeah, we need to fix that. Okay. And then get show close. We have to return false here. Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Then we need to add the API from the stubs for the entry. Let's do that. Here. I'll close this. And then we're going to do this and this and this. So these are just stubs for our public API. That we can document. Okay, this is a constructor. Okay, so open. The which contact group the name of the group adds from the into group the name returns transfer none, because this is not we don't transfer the ownership of the tagged entry, the tag object. It's stored inside the tagged entry. entry remove flag entry to update name that name of flag removes the event flag from you will return null here, and then here it leaves a list model of all things inside the entry returns. We return a full in this case. To return a full ownership of the list model. List model of the and again stub, so we can build without warnings. And yeah, this is pretty much a basic implementation. We might want to, instead of using an hash table at this point, we might want to create a glist store. It will make iterating over the tabs the same. It will make adding and removing tabs a little bit more expensive, but if you add 1 million tags, I seem to believe, well, I believe it's your fault if stuff breaks. Honestly, you should not be doing that. So at that point, being constant time access isn't that important. We can iterate over them. And yeah, as I was saying earlier, maybe we don't want a box layout for the tag entry. We want an actual flow layout, so you can add more tags and they will reflow if the size isn't big enough. At which point we will probably need to have, like, for instance, at this point we will need to do something like GTK widget plus set layout manager type, and it's going to be GTK widget plus here, and then it's going to be GTK type box layout. So it's going to be a box layout. So we get the text and we get the tags, but we probably want to store the tags inside a separate widget. Instead of doing this, we can use something like a list store tags, and then have a widget box and then instead of doing this, we do something like this. So box widget and pattern, and then inside the self init, we don't do this anymore. Let's call it a little bit different. Tag box. We do GTK flow box new instead, and then we do GTK widget set parent self parent box GTK widget self. And we do tags box. And then the list store, it's going to be self tags g list store new tag. And then inside here we do g clear object tags. It's going to be tags box. Basically do something like this instead, and not use a hash table. Use a list store. Yeah, at which point we really need the name to be inside the tag, so we deal with that. And then maybe we add API to say I want the tagged entry to have like 3 tags per row before reflowing, like for instance. It's slightly different. It will also look a little bit, might look a little bit weird because the entry do not, and GTK text does not reflow. It will continue. So we want to, for instance, be centered, even if the label, right, even if the tags reflow, or we want it to be always at the top. Like, let's see. Like, for instance, this one, it doesn't reflow, it just continues. If you have like a bajillion tags, the label is going to be up. So the alignment might be align top instead of align center. Yeah, it's probably going to require a little bit of thinking on how we want this to be working, especially in case of reflowing. But yeah, it's been 3 hours, so I think we can pause a little bit, and then we'll continue in next stream and see what happens there. But yeah, I think I demonstrated how writing a widget is usually spending 80% of the time trying to figure out what the widget should do and how the widget should operate and how that reflects on the API, instead of just coding stuff and yeah, whatever. 80% of the time, the design of the widget, it will influence its API, and vice versa. And you want to answer a bunch of questions beforehand. And if you are trying to figure out how stuff works, then you probably want to ask other people as well, just to figure out, just to understand if you're just getting inside your head instead of doing everything up front. Like 5 minutes of thinking saves the 3 hours of coding usually. But I know that programmers will take it the other way around. Like 3 hours of coding saved 5 minutes of talking to other people. It usually happens a lot. Well, it happens a lot. Anyway, so yeah, let's stop here for a little bit for this stream, and then next stream we're gonna finish this and get to an actual widget that we can propose to the design team for them to demolish it. And we'll see what happens then. Thanks everyone for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, then consider subscribing to my channel and subscribing to my Twitch, where I do documentation, writing, and coding on stream on GNOME, GTK, and the GNOME development platform. And everyone have a great rest of the day and have fun. And I shall see you next week on Monday. See you next time. Bye.